Hey guys.
Hey.
It looks like some of the signups must have had a bit too much fun last night. But it is a weekend, so I do applaud all of you who showed up today for getting up in time and logging on. Thank you so much. Having a seminar with just me would tend to be a bit awkward. Let's all unmute yourself and tell us where you're from and your name real quick, since we got a small group today.
Zach. I'm in Chapel Hill, North Carolina.
Awesome. How's the weather out there, Zach?
Beautiful.
Wow.
It's fantastic today. Yeah.
Everybody's got great weather except me. I see this. I see what's happening. And Michael, you are back east. Is that correct?
Yep. I'm Mike. I'm in Rockville, Maryland.
Awesome. Awesome. And Laura, we know you're in the great state of Texas. And Lance, I believe you're in
South Jordan, Utah.
Utah. Gotcha. We have a nice smattering of the country. That's awesome. On the last class we gave, we had a person from Finland and also a person from England. We actually have my friend John from the UK who threatened to show up, so he might appear. When I thought last night of how do I define the JamAlong basic philosophy, and the very first subject is that where everyone's playing the same song at the same time, which I think we can all agree upon is a good foundation to begin from. I'll never forget some of the jam sessions I went to when I first started going to the Strawberry Music Festival in Yosemite, and they would have these mega jams, usually sparking up after midnight in the camps. And the circles would be so big they would form concentric layers. And I remember being on the outside with my banjo and sort of like shouldering my way in, trying to get sort of toward the center of the galaxy of this jam. And as I went through each layer, I noticed that the songs kept changing. So there was about 3 or 4 songs before you got to the center, the nucleus, and all of a sudden you notice what song it was. So that would be like the opposite of what we're trying to do with most of our smaller jams. No matter what kind of songs you're doing, there tends to be sort of a formula that happens. So let me do a quick screen share. This is called Jam Anatomy. Don't worry, it's PG-13. And I'm going to do a very quick run through. This is also included in your syllabus so you can print that out and have it on the wall. But basically, what's going to happen anytime you're participating in most styles of jams is that you're going to see someone kick it off. And we have the count off, 1, 2, 3, 4. We've got potatoes, which is a really interesting onomatopoeia. Did I say that right? For an instrument counting. So this is considered counting off in banjo bonics. All right. It's called potatoes because 1 potato, 2 potato, 3 potato, 4 potato is sort of like a joke on how fiddle players shuffle to begin the song. Long, short, short, long, short, short. We have the intro riff. A lot of pickers will start like this. And then they're into the song. And then we have the refrain where sometimes you can end with the chorus and then the verse starts and everybody jumps in. Regardless of how you launch, once we're into the song, there's this continuum that moves around in a circle from either the lead parts or the verses. And it switches over to back and forth to the verses and then the leads. And you have this circle that goes around and around in most styles of music. Now, the neat part is you have these cues. So you can have it signified by either people basically just diving in, or you have someone pretty much conducting it with a call out. Then we have the ending cue. My favorite is if you're standing up, you raise one leg, and that shows that we're about to land the song. Please remember, if you're standing up, only one leg at a time. And then we have the ending, which is usually the last chord, or what we call a bluegrass tag. It's a classic rhythm that you'll hear them do the songs with. And then we have the rock and roll ending, which is basically everyone frantically flailing and soloing at the same time, and then it crashes altogether. So that's basically what you'll see: country, folk, bluegrass, blues. That's sort of typical structure of the song. Then we have C under number 1, which is a positive and inclusive experience. Basically, my philosophy is everyone should be allowed to participate except didgeridoo players. It's kind of a joke, but that's actually the first story in my book. See how what I did there? Banjos in Babylon. If you haven't picked it up, it's available at JamAlong website, and the first story is called Didgeridoo. And that'll explain that in greater detail if you wish to go down that rabbit hole. Let's go to the 3 pillars of jamming on item 2. Basically, chords are king. And Lance here leads several jams, and I really appreciate the work that you're doing, Lance. And I'm sure you would agree that no matter if it's country or Crosby, Stills and Nash or pretty much any kind of song, knowing the chords and the order of the chords is almost like the first precursor to being involved. Otherwise, you're relegated down to being a bongo player, which is not a bad thing. But chords are king in almost all the styles of music. That's one thing I've noticed in 40 years of jamming. Chords are king. Now, to drill down on that a bit, it's the chords do you know good if we're not staying in time with the other players. And that's why in item B under 2, I call it using your third ear. It's almost like both of our ears are generally tied down to ourselves, like listening to what we're doing. And that's how people drift out of time. So it's almost like you have to have an extra ear that's locked onto the jam session that's separate from what's hearing you. And that tracks the timing. Then we have being in tune and staying in tune. Most people have no problem with the first part of that sentence. The issue is they think their instrument came tuned at the factory, and that's all there is to it. Literally tuning between each song is not a bad idea. That's why I allow at my jam sessions basically this cacophony to happen between songs so we can get back in tune. For you banjo players out there, I'm glad to announce there's a new tuner out that's very effective. I picked one up today. Let's move on to item 3, the Jamily Tree. And this is to depict the different styles of music and their jammability level. For example, right off the bat, a Baroque chamber orchestra has a low jammability level. We're like a 40-person circle doing wagon wheel, it's a nightmarish thought, has a high jammability level. So basically, you can see at the bottom of the tree is beginner moving up to an advance, okay? So at the high jammability level, we have the beginner slow jam. This is what I recommend, the phrase you use when you start to promote jams or have your own. Slow jam is a great buzzword today. Everyone's using it. It just means let's not play at bluegrass tempos all the time. Because as you all know, there's 3 tempos in music: slow, medium, and bluegrass. So the slow jam dictates that we all have time to play the song together. Then we have the folk sing-along. You hear some like Peter, Paul, and Mary, and like, you know, As I Went Down to the River to Pray, and it's more singing than picking, and that's got a fairly good jammability level, okay? Now we move up to intermediate jammability level. You have the classics jam. Lance, this is one of the things you do. We're all pop and rock, basically anywhere from the like 50s up to the 90s. You share songs and you trade it around the circle. And the interesting thing about that style of jam, it's not so much that you're taking turns taking instrumental leads, but the turns are people choosing songs. So it's like one fractal out. You're still going around in the circle, but when it's your turn, you're picking a song, not necessarily taking a lead. The blues jam. The reason that has a high jammability level is because every song's the same. There's 5 million blues titles. There's one blues song, the 12-bar blues. And those of you who have worked with me on the blues know this. It can have different styles, or swing, or rock, maybe bossa nova. But nonetheless, it's all the same chord progression, the 12-bar blues, okay? Then we move up to the old-timey jam. I call that sort of like somewhat messier bluegrass, passionate but a little bit sloppy, and we all play the melody at the same time. So you don't have to worry about jumping in and out of your leads, because it's okay to play the melody all at the same time while a couple of people frantically flail away on the chords. Of another very high jammability level is drum circles. Description of that is no. Then we have the traditional bluegrass jam, and that's where you have more rules come into play, and that's where the jam anatomy kicks in, okay? The traditional Irish jam, I grouped that with the old-timey jam because they have the same interesting tradition of playing all the melodies together, and there's not a lot of improvisation. Then we have the spontaneous jam. That usually sparks up around the campfire around 1 in the morning, where people are sort of improvising together and making it up at the same time. Unfortunately, that has a lower jammability level because you have to be pretty much psychic to follow along. Less jammable also is the songwriter circle. Now you have original songwriters sharing their material, usually involving 13 to 15 chords and the plight about the dolphin in modern society or something about global weather patterns. Now, Those are fun if you know the material ahead of time. Otherwise, original songs are hard to follow along with. That's why we use the term singer-songwriter in the industry. Now, the least jammable is the top of the tree. The newgrass jam, that's all those like David Grisman sort of like Bela Fleck people. The jazz jam, and I know that I'm learning jazz now, that is a very low jammability level. You have to know a lot of skills and chord shapes to be able to play that. Then we have the showboat jam. That's just basically a rock star from the main stage, a Bela Fleck, if whatnot, surrounded by adoring minions playing his songs. And that has a very low jammability level. Finally, the most dangerous of all is the faux jam, where you somehow stumble into a band's rehearsal and they're not really jamming at all. So that's a good reference when you decide to have your own jam, to start at the bottom of the tree. Like Lance, you do the classics jams and you do some bluegrass. So a bluegrass slow jam and a classics jam are often some of the easiest places to get started when you're hosting. It's a really good launching point for you. Now let's look at A under 3, knowing the style. So each of those styles have sort of etiquette that go along with it. You're not going to go to an Irish jam and you hear this. You go. It's like putting sauerkraut on your banana split. Some things just don't mix, like kilts and trampolines. Certain things you should not combine, regardless of your musical background. Let's look at item 4, the JamAlong 5 levels. Now, this is the flagship of my jamming philosophy. Hey, quick side note, if you haven't muted your channel, I believe that's you, Archie, please mute it so we don't hear your various noises. No problem. We'll have you back on in a minute. So now let's hop over to the next graphic, which is the 5 levels of jamming. If you've taken lessons with me for more than a minute, you've probably heard me spout this philosophy. And the reason is, I think it's one of the best models in inclusivity. So let's do a quick tour of that. Basically, everyone plays the chords. Most people jump in at the middle of the pyramid. That's your like center. That's like where everybody hangs out. That's where the gravity is, okay? Now, as you shift down to easier levels, some people, like the bass player, play just the root of the chord. You don't have to play the whole chord. So if your song goes G, the D, you could literally go and become a bass player. Any instrument can play bass lines. Then we can shift down to level 1. We're playing rhythm. Guess what your most primal rhythm instrument is? Tapping your foot or clapping your hands. For the love of Pete, please do the upbeat. Friends don't let friends clap on 1 and 3. It's 2 and 4. And then finally, we could shift all the way down to what I call level 0. Stop playing and basically just enjoy the jam. That has a lot to do with etiquette in jams. In fact, there's a phenomenon that I've noticed in the Celtic jams, like a traditional pub jam, where they sit out, quote unquote, half the time. They'll play a tune they know, and then they'll just sit there and drink their Guinness and enjoy the session. And then when a tune comes around, they know they'll jump back in. They don't play back up to songs they don't know, which is, by the way, a brilliant concept. So under 4, the JamAlong 5 levels, we want to talk about knowing those levels. So let's shift back and move up the chart now, okay? So now moving up, we have melody. Now this means if we're playing like Coming Around the Mountain, right? The pure melody would be something to the effect of... Now generally that's the singer, because instruments like to spice it up. As my banjo people out there know, you want to add rolls and hammers and pulls and licks and whatever to make it more like... But generally the singers live on level 4. Instrumentalists can jump up to level 5, which is when it comes around to you in a more bluegrass type jam, and you get to take what's called a lead. You get to improvise solos, play variations, or play your version of the melody. So the trick with this is learning how to shift when you get in trouble. If you're playing your lead and you get in trouble, in other words, you crash, shift down to either picking out the pure melody or shift down to playing chords. And then when you feel you got it, shift back up. The more fluid you are on your feet with level shifting, the more fun you'll have in any style of jam session, okay? So then, say you're playing the chords and you get in trouble. You forget the chords. I do it all the time. shift down to playing rhythm. Mute the strings, little cluckety-pluckety noises. Then when you get back in, you can shift back when you remember the chord progression. Shifting is what it's all about, okay? That's really going to save your bacon when you crash. So then under item 4, we have what's called the cheater lead. This is something that I've been teaching more and more of. If you're having trouble playing that lead that you prepared for the jam, and the wheels are falling off, there is a trick in all stringed instruments where you just play the chord progression, but instead of strumming or boom chucking or whatever you do for backup, you pick a random combination of strings. Now, banjo players would call this a roll, but mandolin people and guitar people could also just pick a random combination of strings. And as soon as you stop strumming and you make single notes, it sounds like you're improvising a lead. So that's something I'd like you guys to practice on your own, is putting on a backing track or something that gives you the chords, and then follow the chords along while you pick a random assemblage of strings, and it works as a lead. Guitar people and mandolin people call that cross-picking. It's a way to get around playing your lead, especially when you crash. Let's go to item 5, building repertoire. And once again, hate to keep picking on you, Lance, but being a jam host yourself, you probably know how important it is to have song lists. So when you show up, the conversation doesn't go like this. Do you got a song? No, I don't. Do you got a song? Let me think. And then you have a bunch of people thinking and tuning and talking, and someone in the back noodling scales, and it becomes very unpleasant very quickly. So, exactly. So you want to have, basically the principle of building repertoire is to have a list of songs. Now, I do have a list of songs that I consider very common in bluegrass and folk, and that's under free ebooks and charts at JamAlong.org. Just hit the resources and scroll down. It's the first link. I would recommend having that in your tablet or print it out. Starting a song notebook. If you're attending jams, I always bring a notebook. And when songs come up that I like or don't know or both, write the title down and then hit me up at our next Zoom session and I'll teach it to you, or just go on YouTube and find it. It's probably there. Okay? And then getting your backups solid. If you're hosting a jam or attending a jam, after you know the songs, everyone in this group pretty much knows that the most important thing is playing accompaniment to the song, first and foremost, before you go off on some blazing, face-melting lead part. So how do you practice your backups of getting solid? I recommend using my backing tracker app. There's other apps out there as well, but you have to pay for them. But those of you who have been using my backing tracker know that if you have the chords going over and over and over again, let's say like you're playing something real basic like Bury Me Beneath the Willow. So when this is playing, okay, that might seem boring and fuddy-duddy, but when you're practicing your backup along with that and trying to add the things that you and I both know we've been trying to add, the fill licks, the bass lines, the passing chords, stuff we'll circle back with on page 3 here in a minute, it really helps to have that indicator when the chord changes. It goes back to the first principle. We're all trying to play the same thing at the same time over anything else. Otherwise, it's not a jam. It's, what would that be? A Grateful Dead circle? No. It would be a late night hippie bongo fest. And, depending on your state of mind, I guess those could be enjoyable. Now, let's talk about real life practicing. I can't tell you how many students I have come to me that have a bunch of blazing leads they worked out and great instrumentals, but they didn't learn how to switch back and forth from the backup to the lead, and they crash at jam sessions. Super important. So I call this jam format. You hop back over to your backing tracker, okay, and here's the method that you want to do. Basically, you let it go through one whole time from the beginning to the end, and you're playing backup. I don't care if you're pick strumming, you're boom chucking, you're rolling, you're playing backup all the way through. When you get to here, you stop playing for a nanosecond, and then when it starts again, you jump into your lead. You're getting practice going back and forth from your backup part to your lead part. I've been doing this for 40 years, and I can tell you there's no more dangerous spot than the switch from backup to lead in your jamming life, and it happens all the time. We'll circle back to that in a minute. I call it the 2-to-1 formula at the bottom of page 1. Generally, you're going to play backup as twice as frequent as you'll play the lead part, if you want to get the email asking you back to the jam, that is. And then, so in JamAlong, I have the 4 checkboxes. Those of you who have a practice room with me know that it goes chords, lead, variations, and improv. So when you're playing that game with whatever backing track you're using, you want to eventually try to hit those 4 categories. So if you have musical morals, you'll play the backup 2 or 3 times through, okay? And then we're done with the backup. We go to our lead. We go back to the backup, maybe a couple more times through. Now we get to have the luxury of variations and improvisation. Variations are where we learn how to play the tune higher up the fingerboard. And it's all worked out ahead of time, okay? Improvisation is the final frontier, and some of you I'm working with that on, where you take your scales, you add the 3 R's and the slides, hammers, and pulls, and you start making them into music while the song's going on. But then once you're done with that, when it gets to the end, and that's why I'm not trying to like ballyhoo about my app, but it's like karaoke. You can see when you're done, you switch back to your backup. And that's really the best way you can flex and get ready for jams without having other humans present. Okay, let's go to page 2 on our syllabus. This is called the staying on the train philosophy. Those of you who jam know this very well. A jam is like a moving train. If you fall off or mess up or forget where you are, you have to stop, run back to the train car you were on, get back on it. Okay, because the whole circle's not going to come grinding to a halt and start the song over again for you. It's very rare that happens. How do we get ready for that? I call it stress inoculation. Okay, this is a phrase way back when I used to train in martial arts and stuff, and you had to find ways to mimic the state of adrenaline and still function. All of you know it's one thing to play a piece you've learned and then play it with someone staring at you. Especially those of you who do Zoom lessons with me know it's a whole different ball game. And I don't care if you've been playing all your life. For some reason, I think it's especially because I'm the teacher, even though I'm a nice guy and I really don't have very many standards. Nonetheless, it puts stress on you. So guess what? That's good. That's what I keep telling y'all. One of the best things about having a coach is that you have to learn to deal with stress and keep the adrenaline down as you perform for that human sitting in front of you, okay? Then we have the park bench drill. I love this one. Basically, you go somewhere semi-public, and you start playing, and people are walking by, walking their dogs, bicycling, whatever, and you just keep going. And then, horror of horrors, at some point, someone's going to stop and listen to you. For the love of Pete, keep playing. Keep a straight face. Try to get through. So it's like being at the beach and waves are coming up at your feet. It's like someone might even clap. Someone might sit down on the bench. You never know what's going to happen, but you continue to play your songs. Okay? Might as well open up your case too while you're at it. Why not? Make a couple bucks. When I first moved to Humboldt County, very quick story, I decided to play street music in the plaza. Beautiful little plaza, little hippies with hula hoops running around and whatnot, jugglers and such. And I played a couple songs. I got $1, another $1, and then a bag of weed, and then $2 more. And I'm like, okay, I'm $6 in a bag of weed, and then 2 more people came by dressed like circus clowns and like dumped handfuls of weed into my guitar case. The thing still smells. It's been 4 years, and so just be advised where you're living. Opening up your case could have different implications. So now let's go to 7. Backup basics. Backup is the key to all of this. Number 1, knowing the chords, obviously, okay? And that's another good thing about using an app like the Backing Tracker, because you could print out the chord charts for yourself. It's so convenient having those. Let's say you had a more fancy song. Let's look for something funny like Wayfaring Stranger, okay? That's a little more complex. So it might not be a bad idea to go up here on the right, click print, and then you have a fancy dancy chord chart you can print out and have in your guitar case that looks like that. The whole song on one page. Having the chords is super duper convenient if it's a tricky song, okay? Some people like to throw shade on folks who bring charts or tab to a jam. And I always bring it back to, look, we all agree that some of the most complex and difficult styles of music are classical and jazz. It doesn't matter if you don't like them or not. They're complex and difficult. What do those two styles have in common? People bring thick books of chords and put them on a music stand. And they use charts for these styles. Can't be bad if they're doing it, okay? So now backup basics, B under 7. Those of you who jam already know this, but it's so easy to forget. There's two things that have to shift when you move to an accompaniment roll. Your volume and your tone, okay? Banjo players in particular, because this sound and this sound, two different animals, okay? So, and volume is very important too. So what I say when you're coming out of your lead part, watch what happens. Not only did I drop my volume, but I moved to a softer tone. That really makes a difference, especially with 7, 10, 12 people in the circle. If they all drop their tone, volume and soften their tone, you can be heard whatever you're doing. That's the number one. Now, backup basics, C under 7, upbeats and downbeats. We call these booms and chucks. You all have experienced someone, and the song's going along, they've figured out that they like to do the offbeat, but then they get upside down, and they're playing on the beat, completely oblivious to the fact that they're playing opposite everybody else. They're in time still, but they're just playing on the downbeat. Almost all of folk, country, and bluegrass, and a lot of Western and all that kind of music has a very big emphasis on the upbeat. There's a down and an upbeat in almost all of Western music. Let me demonstrate. That's the down. This is the up. That right there is the closest a lot of us get to dancing, including me. But being aware of those differences is very cool, because if I do this, something's like very deeply wrong with that. Now in rock and roll, a lot of times you'll have them playing the beat. Most of you have probably seen that infamous sketch with Will Ferrell playing the cowbell as they're during Don't Fear the Reaper. he's on the beat, and then he's like very, very, very obviously on the beat, and then he's slightly off while he's on the beat, and it just gets worse and worse. But it all started because he was just basically duplicating the bass part. Now I know in some styles people do that, but not in folk, bluegrass, country, and a lot of the styles you'll be playing. Item 8 on page 2, the number one danger spot. If there's one thing you take home from this, even if you can already do this well, I want you to help others to learn how to do this, because this thing traumatizes people and causes them to pawn their banjo and stop jamming altogether. When you have a lead part worked out and you put blood, sweat, and tears into trying to work this thing out, and then you get to the jam and you launch for a second and then crash into a ditch and explode into flames, it's not super duper fun. So you have to have a way to practice that. So that's, once again, I come back to the backing tracker app or some kind of a device where you can see when your backup's almost done, and then you get into your lead. Now let me give you a little Jedi tip that I've been doing with people. When you are using the backing tracker and you're practicing getting into your lead, it's very smart to leave a blank spot. So in other words, when I'm just about ready to play my lead, I'll basically, this part right here, I will stop playing. I will literally let the rest of the jam carry the last measure, because that gives me a chance to get ready for my lead. And if you have more than like 3 people in a circle, it's not going to be that noticeable if you drop out. So let's say I'm playing Will the Circle Be Unbroken, and we're at the very end, In the Sky, Lord, in the Sky, and I'm playing back up and getting ready to play my lead. Here's what I do. Will the circle be unbroken in the sky, Lord, in the sky? I let maybe even 2 measures go by while I brace myself to jump into my lead. Then we have ditching the pickups, D under 8. A lot of lead parts start with a couple of notes or more that are actually before the song actually starts. Usually there's a repeat sign or a double bar line that signifies that, but I'm sure some of you have heard me throw shade on pickup notes. When you're jamming and there's anything prior to 2 bars or a repeat sign, get rid of those. Don't play them. You can play them when you come back around, because then you'll already be in the flow. And then we have under C under 8, recovering from crashing. Music is very much like life. And not to wax philosophical, but it seems as though there's one thing I've learned in my advanced age is that it's not so much not screwing up, it's how gracefully do you recover from that. And like if you watch figure skating, I always cringe when some like person's doing a beautiful move and then they slam butt first on the ice. Somehow they get back up, they have a straight face, and they begin again. And you're like, wow, that took some guts to recover like that. It's the same thing in music. If you crash your lead and start weeping openly, it's not the most smoothest way to get out of that. If you crash your lead, keep a straight darn face. I have a student, and for some reason, every time she makes what she thinks is the slightest mistake, she shakes her head violently, like, no. And so I've got her trained now to nod her head when she makes a mistake. And now people think she meant to do it. It's like Jazzy all of a sudden. She's like, yeah. She does a terrible note and goes, yeah. But it's all about selling it to the audience. That's a whole nother class that maybe we'll do something on performance someday. Who knows? So, recovering from crashing. The antidote is humor. When the day arrives that we all sit around the same campfire, and I trust it will happen someday, remind you at our lessons about my weekend intensive idea I just had. I'm really excited. You'll notice that I crash a lot, number one, because I'm always trying things I can barely do, and then I'll laugh. I'll laugh when I crash. Because then it's like, that was a disaster. And it's hard for someone to hold it against you when you're laughing. It's like the antidote to pretty much any kind of stage fright is humor. Then we have switching to the cheater lead. We talked about that. If you're just not making it and you're going, I'm not getting this, just go back to the chords. Pick notes. If you can shift down and shift back up. Another thing that you can practice with the backing tracker. Play a lead, crash on purpose, shift down to picking notes out of the chords, get back into your lead. That kind of fluidity will make you like Bruce Lee of the jamming scene. It really will. Okay? Now we have stop, listen, jump back in, 3 under C under 8. Stopping playing is a very wonderful thing to share with people. Hence my sticker I have that says, I'm better than I sound. Sometimes you sound better when you're not sounding. And so being able to stop playing, hear the song, and get back in is another invaluable jamming skill. That's another antidote to crashing is stop the crash. What do they say? The first law of holes is when you're in a hole, stop digging. It's the same thing when you're crashing. Stop plowing along over the mailboxes, get out of the car, look at your map, and get back in. And then we have tapping out. Sometimes you have to wave the white flag. This is just life. So you stop your lead, you laugh, you take a drink of whatever's next to you, and just make sure it's not the fiddle player's spittoon. And then you get back in when it comes around again. I do that all the time in jazz. I'm trying to learn jazz these days, and all the chords are like coming at you 20 miles a second, and they sound so odd you can't tell what key they're in because they have 13 notes in them. So a lot of times I'll just stop and wait till it comes around again and then start again. Once again, with a chuckle. Okay? Let's look at jam etiquette under 9 on page 2. Tune up frequently. Man, these don't come tuned at the factory. You have to be twisting these pegs all the time. That's why the slogan is, in folk music, we spend half of our life tuning and the rest of our life playing out of tune. And it's pretty much true, but we have to keep attempting to get back in tune. We have dynamics, quiet backup. Play quiet, play quiet, play quiet. The more people, the quieter you have to play in a circle. And then we have C under 9. Don't play what you don't know. I love the way that sounds. I think that's going to be a t-shirt soon. Don't play what you don't know. The classic example is the Celtic music. Half the time they're not playing a thing. They're just sitting there enjoying their Guinness. And then they play when the tune comes that they know. Then we have D under 9. Play back until it's your turn for the lead. I'm going to guess that all of us in this class who've been in jams before at one point have experienced the guy or gal in the circle who's noodling away the whole song, playing essentially solos, okay? And Guitar people love to do that. We have to find ways to have empathy, but yet politely let them know that's not helping the song to hear a guitar solo the whole time when you're trying to sing or do your lead, okay? So that's why we say play backup 70% of the time, okay? Be alert for the ending cues. That's E under 9. Whether it's a leg lift, some people do the neck flag. This means we're bringing it around. Circular move of the peg stock. Some people scream the song's about to end. In any case, be alert for that because all landing wingtip to wingtip is one of the things that makes a great jam session. Let's move over to 10, survival theory. Music theory is probably the worst taught subject of anything, probably, not even in music. People get traumatized and bored and say, screw it, why am I going do, re, mi, and this and that? All you really need to learn is a couple of things for jam survival. Number one, creating and reading chord charts. That's pretty easy, okay, as long as you know the shape. And then critical chord repertoire. This is probably more beginner, but I wanted to include it. If you know G, C, D, F, A, E, and B7, you're going to survive most songs, okay? If you know E minor, A minor, D minor, B minor, you'll survive most songs. Most songs. In fact, a lot of bluegrass songs have both chords, so you just need G, C, or G and D. Tom Dooley, 2-chord song. Then we have chord families. Now, this is something that some of you have gotten already from the classes before, but basically, if you know the chords that go good together ahead of time, you'll have a lot greater chance surviving a song you don't know. Let's take a quick peek at that. So basically, every key has 2 sets of chords, what we call primary and secondary chords. So let's take the key of G because that's the people's key, okay? Right now in the key of G, your key is the 1. Your 4 and 5 are the next most likely to happen. And then your 2, 6, and 3, or A minor, E minor, and B minor, are slightly less likely to happen, but still happen a lot. So when someone calls a song in G, and you know ahead of time that you're likely to encounter C, D, E minor, and A minor, you're way ahead of the game because you're already in your head have thought of where those shapes are. Okay? Now, real quick, bit of theory. The numbers simply refer to the scale. In almost all of Western music, everything comes back to the scale. So if we have a G scale, G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G. Look, G was the 1. A was 2. Look at that, it's lining up. 3 is B of the scale. You see where I'm going with this? That's where the numbers come from, in case you're wondering that. But become familiar with the chord families. That's basically a dumbed down version of the circle of fifths, by the way. A little disclaimer there, which another disclaimer is wrongly named. It's not the circle of fifths. We should call it the circle of fours because all chords move up a fourth. End of story. I rest my case. Nonetheless, if you have the chord family chart, it's a little easier to read because I grouped them all in a circle for you, okay? And then one more thing about the chord family chart is you can also quickly find the relative minor. So, for example, C over here has the same scale as A minor. There's a mysterious relationship between the major key and its relative minor. The relative minor is also the primary dating pool in the Deep South. I'm sorry about that joke. Let's go over to, now we're under 10, survival theory, and we're going to look at hand reading. I'm actually in the process of making a chart that I'm going to get to everybody, which shows photographs of a guitar player's hand making a chord from the opposite direction, like you're looking over at them. Because most string players play guitar. Next follow probably mandolin and then banjo. If you can see the shape and know if it's a G, C, or D, or A minor, or E minor, you can read the guitar player's hand just like you're doing a chord chart. So I'm going to make a chart for that soon and get it off to all y'all. And then we have the Nashville number system. Remember I talked about how all those chords in the chord family relate to scale tones? Some people call numbers. Instead of going G, A, B, C, we know that's 1, 2, 3, 4. They'll go 1, 2, 3, 4. Some people will just do this. 1, 2, 3, 4. You have to be careful you don't do that chord. And then if you get past 5, you're in trouble. But nonetheless, when you hear numbers, just remember those are scale tones. That's all they are. That's called the Nashville number system. It's good when you have people with capos on, okay? Because then the people with the capos are thinking in different keys. We're going to circle back to that in a minute. Now we have 11. How convenient, the capo. Placement and tuning. When you're using capos, my friends, it's not supposed to go in the middle of the 2 frets. It's supposed to go right up against the fret that you want to capo at. Not on top, but right behind. Because that's where you press, when you fret with your fingers. Okay? And then we have retuning. People don't tell you this when you buy a capo. After you put it on, you have to retune. It's an ugly fact of life. There's not been a capo invented yet that doesn't knock you slightly out of tune. Okay? So once again, tune, 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 tune. Now, banjos, you got to also spike the 5th string. That's because this string was nailed on by a terrible instrument builder in the 1800s. Before him, they were basically 4-string banjos. But he couldn't figure out how to fit it here, so we put it here. We've been dealing with that ever since. That means if you capo here, you have to move the same length on the 5th string. Let's go to the last page. And we have 12, Advanced Jam Skills. Now, I debated whether or not including this because it was a survival class, but we'll do it just a run over of some of the things that, this is a cursory summary of advanced jamming. Please go to the JamAlong YouTube channel and look for the one that's called Advanced Jamming. I have a lecture on that covers all of this stuff for an hour. So if you want to go more down this rabbit hole, that's where you go. First of all, calling a song. Don't be a jam buster. I know you've been through a lot emotionally, and it means so much to you that we're all going to play your song that has 27 chords. But perhaps make a chord chart before bringing that to the jam, or picking something simpler. My band gives me a lot of grief these days because a lot of my songs I write, and not to brag, but I know a lot of theory, have 2 chords. And they're like, why do you keep writing these dumb songs with 2 chords? Because I want anybody to be able to jam on it. What are the chords to your song? G and D. End of case. Now we're playing. So there's a benefit to simplicity in this stuff. And then key and chords. There's a classic phrase in bluegrass called water and whiskey. Water we playing, whiskey we it. Just remember, water and whiskey. And that's what you have to call out. The title so we know it, and the key so we know where to start. Okay? Then we take the lead count. That's B under 12. So I like to get an inventory. Raise your hand if you want to, traumatize yourself when it comes around to you. And then people will go yes or no, and they'll probably crash, and they'll learn from that experience. And then we have counting off, C under 12. So many people crash here, especially when you just started learning how to offer songs to the jam. The first thing you'll hear people do is this. They'll go, okay, I'm going to count it off. It's going to start in G, coming around the mountain. 1, 2, 3, 4. They think they just have to get to 4. It has to be the same tempo as the song. Okay? I know it's scary. I know you're under a lot of pressure, but don't count in a different tempo than the song, for the love of Pete. This happens more than you'd think, actually. People go 1, 2, 3, 4. Literally. I hear it like every other jam. So if your tempo is the same as your song when you count off, you're 80% more likely to get through the rest of that piece. Now, we want to talk about verbal count versus kickoffs. It's safer to count to 4 than to do an instrumental kickoff. More advanced jamming, we do kickoffs. I discussed that in detail in the advanced jamming class if you want to go down that rabbit hole. Okay? And then we have keep under the speed limit. I like to actually, once I find out who's going to play a lead, say, give me a snippet of your lead so I can see what tempo is comfortable for you. And they'll go, and you'll go, okay. And then you'll count 1. You'll match the tempo to what the player's lead ability is, thereby once again reducing the chances of jam trauma. And then we basically want to, after we do that, and it's going around the circle, in more advanced jams, remember, we don't just play backup and lead. All of you who are working with me with scales or licks, or putting licks together to create songs, or learning scales, this is where you get a chance to see if that boat floats. Okay? When it comes around to you in a more advanced session, see if you can survive for 16 bars playing a G scale. You might not. You probably won't. But give it a try. And next 4th or 5th time through, you'll probably make it through to the end of your solo. Okay? Now we have E under 12, advanced backup. This is something that I'm doing with some of my students who are wanting to play more when they're playing backup. And just because I say backup is quiet and mellow doesn't mean it can't be complex. So then we start adding, let me give you the brief rundown. If we're playing Weeping Willow, the first thing we do is add 7 chords. Before you move to another chord, you can add a 7th chord. Now, once again, disclaimer, this is sort of a preview to other advanced lessons we're going to do, but this is advanced jamming, not survival skills. And then after 7th chords, we add bass lines. Any instrument can be a bass. Here we go. I'm putting lines in between the chords. Now, fills. These are fill licks, we call them, where basically we put in a catchy little phrase at the end of the vocal phrase. And there's a classic one that is, if I haven't tabbed that out for you and you want that, text me after the class to get you the tab. So now watch how I put that in there. Will the circle be broken by and by, Lord, by and by? There's a bed. So it's like a little exclamation point, okay? I missed inversions. Inversions is a fancy way of saying, how many ways can I get the same chord? On banjo, we have G, 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 G. You have 5 Gs. My dear old mother is a conspiracy hippie, and she's convinced that I already have 5G Bill Gates microchips embedded in me or something. But that's a whole nother rabbit hole. So if you're using inversions, 7th chords, bass lines, and fills in your backup, you're never going to be bored playing the backup parts. Remind me to circle back to that at our Zoom lessons if you want to get more involved in advanced backup. Expanding repertoire and musical styles. Okay, eventually this, I hate to break it to you, will start to get a wee bit boring just because it's sort of the same happy chicken noises, and you'll want to eventually branch off into some blues. I like Irish music, it's so just lively. It's such a bouncy, lively sound. I love a lot of rock and roll songs. I just taught Harvest Moon to a couple of my students, and they're playing that now at their jam session. So the more styles of music, and this is something I'm sure you relate to, Lance, the more styles you can bring in, the more you have to coach and teach, and the more fun people generally have. And then finally, G under 12, learning improvisation. This is the big boys sandbox, the big girls sandbox. This is where we all spend the rest of our life improving our craft. I'm still trying to be a better improviser. You know what I mean? Because, sure, I can make my scale sound musical now. But what if I want to put in arpeggios? Now that's more difficult for me. So improvisation is like this giant stew pot that you can constantly put more veggies and spices in. It never ends. Remind me at your Zoom lessons to delve into that with you. Item 13. Once again, this is more advanced, but hosting your own jams. And once again, we have a couple hosts here at the class. See the one, I have a workshop called How to Run a Jam on YouTube. That covers everything as far as the details of running it. But basically, you want at least 10 songs in jam format, meaning you know the backup at least. You want to have some lists and charts, man. A song list, which you can email or give to people, and then chord charts. These are 2 different areas. People get confused. Having a song list is just like a bird's eye overview. Having chord charts makes it highly more likely that your less advanced people are going to have a good time and sound good, okay? And then C under 13, recruiting and promoting. This is something that I go into in the other class, so I'm just going to touch on it. Basically, finding pickers. I have a friend who just had a great deal of success using meetup.com. No, it's not a dating service. It's like a social app where you can find people who go kayaking or canoeing or whatever, racquetball, knitting, and he started a bluegrass group on there, and he did really well. So those of you who haven't used that, meetup.com apparently is a really good resource. And then we have D under 13, jam conducting. This is where you go back to that anatomy chart. And you make sure you can count off a song. Look, let me roll that back. You make sure you find out how many people know the song, who's going to take a lead, if that's happening. You're going to count it off. You're going to conduct the leads. Pick it, Bob. Okay, take it, Sue. Walk the dog, Jim. So many different bluegrass colloquialisms to start a lead. And then basically end it somehow. Okay, we're all landing. Boom, whatever you do to land together. As you well know, Lance, that's basically like piloting a 747. Sometimes it crashes, sometimes it doesn't. But the mark of a good jam leader, or jam conductor, if you will, is that the songs end on the same time, ideally on the same chord. That's like the big plus in our book. Then we have lifeguarding. Sometimes you're going to have someone playing opposite the beat, playing off time, playing the wrong chords. You have to have a way to gently inform them that they're not doing it correctly without embarrassing them or making them basically make the situation worse. That's a fine skill. At some point, I'm going to give a class just on that. It's its own category. Just like when you're doing the jam, and like I was doing these public jams in the park. First one we did, somebody wanders up with a guitar with 2 strings missing, with feathers hanging off of it, with his eyeballs aiming in opposite directions. And God bless him. I'm sure he's been to many, many dead shows. But we had to very politely steer him to another jam on the other side of the park, and then watch that jam implode in a mushroom cloud. It was very tough psychology. Slightly amusing, slightly sad. Bittersweet. 14. What now? Number 1, guys and gals. Do yourself a favor. When you're practicing, practice in jam format. And you know what that means. You have to have a backing track. I don't care if it's my app or not, but you have to have a backing track. Number 2, you have to start with the backup. And number 3, you have to switch back and forth from backup to lead. There's 3 elements of jam format. If you're doing that, your songs are going to fly in a jam. That's the beauty of it, okay? Finding a jam buddy. That's B under 14. Some of you are lucky enough to have that in friends and family. If not, the next step up from a backing tracker is a live human being that's going to be playing with you. Now, granted, they come with their own issues, sometimes odors, sometimes stealing your beer. The backing tracker is a lot safer psychologically. But at some point, you want to have a training person, just like playing tennis or something, okay? C under 14, shameless promotion here. Refer a friend over to me. I will get them into shape to jam with you. I'll teach them your songs, okay? And then D under 14, search for local jams. I believe we're coming into a new renaissance of jamming, okay? We just came out of the Black Plague. We're hopefully got a lot of time before Armageddon, and we have this wonderful window. Let's take advantage of it. Let's go ahead and start jamming more than ever. And then finally, E under 14, go back and look at my class, How to Run a Jam. Start your own jam. I recommend you call it a slow jam. But please, song list, chord charts. Song list, chord charts. Okay? So I hope until I see you all again, you'll have at least one jam experience, even just with YouTube. That counts legally. And tell me about it. Tell me about how you got back and forth from your lead to your backup. Were you able to improvise? Do you have a variation on the song? Fill me in on that. Because obviously I'm endlessly fascinated with this. So I'm so glad you all showed up today. This has been quite amusing for me. I hope it was somewhat enjoyable for all of you. Keep up the great work. Have a wonderful weekend. I actually have a great fiddler in town this evening, and he's showing up, and we're going to play some gypsy jazz. He's a big Django fan. So I'm looking forward to tonight. And luckily for you, the class is tomorrow morning, because I would have way less words I'd be able to use. So you guys are amazing. I very much appreciate all of you. Have a great, great weekend, and stay in touch with me, and I'll see you all at your next Zoom classes. Peace out, guys.